So I saw Edgar Wright's new movie The Running Man, and it was not great. Not to say that it was absolutely terrible overall, but out of all the Edgar Wright movies that I've personally seen, this is definitely my least favorite of his. Now unfortunately, this movie does not have a lot of other great qualities as other Edgar Wright movies do. Such qualities as really creative editing and writing, and certainly with how it reincorporates certain aspects and setups throughout its movies. And also just very clever dialogue and genuinely very funny humor throughout. This is definitely one of his more basic paint-by-numbers kind of movie, and it's sort of disappointing to see that. Now for starters, the beginning of this movie feels so incredibly ham-fisted, which can be said about a lot of things throughout this movie. But in the beginning of the movie where it tries to get the audience to sympathize with Glen Powell's character was just so incredibly forced and unnecessary. It's very clear that this movie wants to have some satirical edge to it, but it just feels very convoluted and conflicted when it comes to that element. With how it wants to explore the themes and ideas throughout the central film, it just feels very unfocused in my opinion. Not to say that it's not obvious what they're doing, but it just feels very unclear on how it wants to present them. Something that really brings us down is just how serious it wants to be, but unserious it wants to be throughout the film. I'd much rather prefer this movie a lot more unserious and just delve into the more satirical elements like his other movies, but unfortunately there are many scenes in this film that do heavily require you to take them seriously, which is very difficult to do, mind you. Glen Powell's performance in this movie was not great and kind of awkward at times, and again, I don't know if it's trying to play it off as an intentional joke or genuinely trying to make him intimidating or somewhat, but just feels very conflicted in my opinion. In fact, nobody's performance in this movie was great, and it all feels very conflicted when it comes down to it. The action sequences in this movie are absolutely fine, but nothing really sticks out in my mind. I mean seriously, just compare the action sequences to this movie and his other movies such as Hot Fuzz, The World's End, Scott Pilgrim, and Baby Driver. It's just night and day comparison throughout these scenes. Not to say that there aren't interesting concepts and ideas that are present throughout these fight scenes, but it fails in terms of its execution. The score and music that is used throughout this film is just so overbearing and poorly used. It's really just very generic at the end of the day, and I just didn't like it in the movie at all. Now, at least a positive thing I can say about this movie is the fact that I never felt bored, and it kind of felt like it moved along to the next part kind of quickly and kept me engaged throughout. But just because a movie's not boring does not equate to a great movie overall. I want to get into spoiler talk to talk about some aspects I found issue with, so if you don't want to hear spoilers for this movie, then skip to this part in the video. So near the third act of this movie, Glen Powell's character is running across the highway and he eventually jumps into a vehicle which is being driven by some random woman. He essentially takes this woman hostage, and throughout their ride they start conversing about the ethics of the game or whatever and what he's doing and basically how he's not the bad guy or whatever. And during this conversation, while she's being held hostage, he's able to essentially convince her to join his cause. And it's just so incredibly ridiculous and force-fed. Like, I don't care how convincing you are to this woman, there's no way she's just going to blindly follow you after just 10 minutes of meeting. There's a section of this movie where he's on an airplane and they show him a video of them murdering his family, but earlier in the movie it very clearly communicates that they can fake video pretty well to convince people to other stuff. So in the back of your mind, all you're thinking is, okay, obviously his family is not dead, and basically they're just going to show it later in this movie. And they even try to build up some sort of mystique and uncertainty to it near the end of the scene of whether or not his family is actually alive, but then that's just entirely ruined by the fact that they do confirm that they are indeed alive this scene right after. I also found the main character's journey throughout this film to be somewhat inconsistent throughout. Like, there are points where he's kind of regretful of his actions, but by the end of the movie he fully seems to embrace what he had an idea of in the beginning of the movie, but there are points where it kind of toys with this idea that maybe he's not doing the right thing or whatever. Not to mention the third act of this movie just felt very unnatural with how quickly it got resolved or something. Like, it kind of came out of nowhere in my opinion. Now overall, it's beginning to feel like I really hate this movie, but I assure you that's not the case. I definitely do not love it, but I certainly don't think it's a terrible movie overall, even though it had so much more potential than what it had to be. I would have enjoyed this movie if it delved a lot more into its satirical edge and just took itself a lot less seriously, but hey, it just is a movie that had a lot of left potential. Anyways, check this one out if you want. It's not amazing. I'm probably never going to see this one again. Definitely check out other Edgar Wright movies if you haven't already, and this one gets a 5 out of 10.